feel like I always want to introduce myself like Dr. Nick does on The Simpsons. I might be dating myself because people don't watch that much anymore. My name is Xavier Ramey. I'm Chief Executive Officer of a social impact consulting firm. We're based out of Chicago. It's called Justice Informed. If you look it up online, it'll probably be the only corporation you find in the United States with the first word justice in it. It scares off a lot of people. And the reason why it's called that is because of the nature of the time that we live in right now. I think that before we start doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, we need to understand the time in which we are working. In order to understand the time we're working in, we have to look both retrospectively and futuristically at the current opportunities that we have now inherited. The reality is that the word justice is still something that many people don't understand as much as they would have a different definition of the word equity. One of the first things that we do with our clients is we walk them through a couple of vocabulary points. We simply ask them, what is your definition of racism? What is your definition of sexism? How would you explain ableism? What would you call diversity if you were explaining it to someone who didn't understand? What is your specific definition for? We go through these definitions. What we tend to find every single time, working with dozens and dozens of companies and nonprofits and foundations, nobody's got the same answer. Nobody's got the same answer. If you ask people, why are we doing this right now? Why are we in this conversation about diversity right now? People don't have the same answer. They're coming at it for different reasons. They're coming at it with different perspectives, and they're coming at it with different levels of urgency. This mismatch, I think, has a couple reasons. One, I think it's a mismatch because we never actually learned the words. You see, our education system doesn't teach us how to resolve conflict. It teaches us how to do math. Equations are not the same thing as managing conflicts. People are nonlinear. You cannot apply a linear process of if we do this, then we get that to a thing called a human. You simply cannot do it. And even if you think you can, every single person in this room who has children knows that if you also have two children, you cannot well, the last child, all we did was, and so this time we'll just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. We are people. We have the right to do good, and we have the right to do bad. We have the right to do it, and we hold that right as a truth, whether we say it or not. We have the right to define what we think is important, and we have the right to define what we think is unimportant. If we remember what the great scholar James Baldwin said, it is when ignorance is allied with power, we find the greatest threat that justice can have. This is the reality. We have different definitions. We have different levels of urgency. We have different identities that provide or do not provide perspective for why we're even here talking about this. So what time are we in? Because I think the time should define the definitions, as well as the urgency, as well as the perspective. So I think I'm a smart guy. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think I'm a smart guy. I was really bad at school, don't check the transcripts. But I've done all right in life. As smart as I am, this is the first time I could be this smart in public with this skin. This is the first time in American history that I could be as smart as I am in public. It's the first time I could stand in front of this room and nobody thinks, who the heck is that N-word? That I am sure no one in here is thinking that. This is the first time in my entire family's history, for 7 or so generations, that a Ramey can stand before a crowd and speak without fear. And expect for people to listen. Not only speak and expect for people to listen, speak the truth and expect not to be harmed for it. That's the time we're living in. This is the first time in the nation's history this is possible. This is the first time in our nation's history when people can be refuted for giving bad perspective about something we already have facts to back up. This is the first time in American history where a man's confidence is not more important than a woman's actual lived experiences. This is the first time. The first time. That creates an urgency for every woman. This creates an urgency for every African American. This creates a perspective for everyone committed to this work. And so what is the language that we're using? I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm going to make an assumption that everybody in here is done talking about diversity. You want to do something about it. I'm going to make that assumption. We've all heard this stuff. Diversity is important. We're committed to diversity because a more diverse world allows us to capture the new innovations that are only possible when different people come together. Those innovations were always possible. The people just didn't come together. First time, new time. We're committed to diversity because as a global company, we understand that the perspectives of all of our national partners, suppliers, and employees requires that we not only commit to the realities and opportunities presented to us through the globalized, diversified supply chain, but also because people are important. Y'all have heard this, right? It's probably on some of your company's websites. I just made that up. That's how complex this stuff is right now. Super simple. That's how complex this stuff is. My background's in economics and sociology. You cut that with public policy, and now I understand the differences between how law works, how money works, and what happens to us when the two come together and don't. That's the lens through which I've started Justice Informed to operate in the DEI space. I appreciate the diversity case for, the business case for diversity. I challenge it. You see, there was a business case for feeding your slaves twice a day too. They work harder, you get more out of them, more innovations on the plantation. It's chattel diversity. It doesn't mean you actually think they're human. It doesn't mean you know how to respect them. It doesn't mean you understand dignity. It means you have once again subjected a human to be valued on the basis of their productive capacity for you. That's the time we're living in. This lack of urgency, this lack of definition, this beating around the bush, this non-centering approach, this all boats must rise for the specified harm that only some people and some identities experience must now be reclaimed and restored through a general application. Everyone wasn't locked out of the workforce like women. That's simply not true. I don't believe that men should benefit just because women are now able to work twice as hard to get 3/4 as much. I simply disagree. I don't think that I should be able to reap any benefit of that. I don't feel any sort of way angry about the fact that I shouldn't be able to have a part of the restoration, a part of the philanthropy that comes from the pillage. I don't feel I have any right to that, but I know every guy doesn't agree with that. And they will deflect and dismantle and destroy your DEI committee conversations with their, but what about moments? But what about, well, actually, if you, shut up, Todd, shut up, Todd, shut up. Shut up. Jesus Christ, Todd. Why is he still talking? No microphone. That's privilege. The dude, we just keep making that guy. We just keep making that guy. This conversation, this lackluster, non-specific, non-critical, non-urgent conversation keeps giving Todd the microphone. Let me give you an example. Who here has a company that says they're committed to diversity of thought? Who's heard? Y'all heard the diversity of thought? Diversity of thought. Diversity of thought. Diversity of thought. I love diversity of thought. You know why I love diversity of thought? Because it brings everybody in. You know what happens when everybody's on the boat? It sinks. The challenge with diversity of thought, rather than focusing on what it was supposed to be focusing on, which was the inclusion of people who have experienced in the past, currently, and if we don't do something into the future, harm. That's what it was supposed to be about. But because people felt left out, because they didn't have an understanding that in order to have a community, you have to commune. That in order to actually understand someone, you have to be proximate to them. In order for you to truly fight for them and ally with them, you can't just focus on your 9 to 5 and how you're showing up for people. You have to look at your 5 to 9. You have to look at how you're voting. You have to look at the school funding formulas. You have to understand how the tax allocation in your area might fund police and defund mental health. You have to understand these things to truly be friends to someone. to truly care for them in a way that matters beyond what your paycheck demands. We have people in this world right now, people maybe in this room, who insist on having a corporate commitment to diversity and inclusion and go home, take those wages, and segregate their own cities. And they demand a diverse workforce. They demand it. We insist on working in places that are diverse and living in places that are not. And so what is the value then of the way we've articulated this work? It produces what we have. We have 21st century companies doing 20th century strategies, producing 19th century social outcomes. This is where we're at. And I think at the crux of it is this challenge around things like diversity of thought and the business case for diversity and all these things that get us off the hook from being specific. They get us off the hook. I had a colleague, a friend of mine, call up, and they're working out in Arizona. They run DEI for a company out there, and they said, this diversity of thought thing got me in a hole. I was like, well, what happened? Well, diversity of thought includes political belief, and we didn't think about that. And we've got about 5 guys here who are all members of the alt-right, and they want an ERG because there's only 5 of them, and that makes them a minority of thought. And now they want budget, they want website space, they want the whole kit and caboodle. X, what do we do? What do we do? I get those kind of calls all the time. People who have used this diluted language that created obvious loopholes that once again deflect from what true justice is, which is an accountable relationship with the person next to you, not just a relationship. An accountable relationship. This is what we've inherited. This is what our field, my field is producing. And I'm saying this, I'm shouting out and I'm calling out the facilitators, the practitioners, the people who keep saying these things in rooms. I've learned that this, in Chicago, I have a reputation. Saying stuff like this. But my reputation is one of, if the room is really hard, if folks are not going for this, if they don't want to relate, if we can't get Todd to shut up, send Xavier in. I'm like SWAT team for diversity. But you know what that means? It means that my pain is their classroom. I'm still black when I'm SWAT. I'm still male. I'm in Chicago. I know what it feels like to be hunted by the police. I know what it feels like to narrowly have made it. I know what it feels like for this to be a bulletproof jacket for me. I know what that feels like. And so when I go into those rooms, unfortunately, the way that we often provoke empathy is through epiphany. The way that you create epiphany is by manufacturing an experience that can startle the heart. And what startles the heart more than pain? Not only pain, unexpected pain. You see, they would look at me and they would say, oh, it couldn't have happened to him. And unfortunately, I know that it couldn't have happened to him. It's one of the best tactics for getting them to understand it can happen to him. Which means I have to keep sharing my story. I have to keep talking about it. Sometimes I have to dig deep into my experiences in Ferguson. I have to tell them about what it means to stand up before 14, 15, 16 different police units as they point guns at you as you march to say your life matters. Because that'll get them to realize that, oh, well, maybe the diversity meeting's not enough. It didn't stop that. Sometimes you got to dig deep and you got to talk about how you sat in the back of police cars with your eyes streaming tears because you lived in an all-white neighborhood. You were one of those 2% of non-white people and they didn't think you were a neighbor there. And every quarter you were on the hood of a police car and for some reason, pain speaks. Pain speaks, and I wish it didn't. And as a facilitator, as a practitioner, and as someone who's looking to not only lead in the field, but I'm looking to have leaders in this field. I'm looking to find people to lock arms who are ready to be urgent, who are ready to be specific, who are ready to use every doggone tool in the toolbox. My pain is the world's classroom. I'm okay with that. There's been a lot of tweets about how black men need to go to therapy. I listened. But this is the reality. Why do people need to hear it hurts for them to hear it matters? Why do we get to avoid conversations when people who've been left outside the doors of opportunity never got to avoid the effects of being left out? Why do we have to make solutions for all boats to rise when only some boats were sinking? Why do we have to go with definitions that are palatable to people who've never even considered what it's like to live next to us, because they never do? What time are we in, y'all? What time are we in? We're in the first time for this. We're in the first time for this. These are new challenges. These are new opportunities. Last week I was in Milwaukee. I was giving a speech before one of the largest social and civic clubs there, and it's part of one of the largest nonprofits. You can imagine a $2 billion nonprofit. They're one of the largest non-governmental funders on the planet, and they had asked me to come in and give a speech about the new international body's diversity, equity, inclusion statement. The International Board just adopted a DEI statement, and that's a really big deal. And they wanted me to come in to give perspective about what I thought, because I'm a member of that social and civic club. It's called Rotary. And they wanted me to give perspective about it. And you know how hard it is to tell somebody who sat in a room and fought, a board of folks? They were fighting over this definition. They were fighting over what to include, what not to include, who to put in there, who not to put in there, who to call out and why we shouldn't call people out. How hard it is to tell them this isn't going to get us there. What does it mean when the only actual data point you're looking for is gender growth for women? And that usually just affords opportunities for white women. What do you do when people can deal with the conversation around LG but not BTQ and certainly not IA? When the definition you create doesn't hold the love we need. Did you catch that? When the definitions we create don't allow for the love that we need. It's a problem. And if we literally create a new definition in the ambitions of our time, in the hope of our time, and those definitions are not strong enough to get us to actual equity, what authority do you all feel you have to stand in the gap and say, this cannot be how we define our work, how we define our ambitions, how we define ourselves? That's what I think the work is right now. It's creating language, creating urgency, going before your company and saying, this is the first time we've been able to say this. And it deserves no pat on the back. You see, every generation has the opportunity to be different. People always say, do you have hope in the next generation? Of course I do, until they start accumulating things. Until they start growing up and sinking their investments in material things. I have a lot of hope for every generation until they start getting stuff. Every generation has kicked the can, has delegated equity to the next, and then rationalized the reason why. Like I said, they have a right to do good. They also hold to their right to not do so. And it's doing what's necessary in your time that creates the catalytic changes for the future. You see, when we always go back to the civil rights movement of the 60s, we go back because it was a nation standing up and incrementally, incidentally, and exceptionally making a sacrifice in that time. And it's not the only sacrifice that has been made, but it was one so glaring that it deserved monuments. That was so effective that it showed the holes in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't even allow for women to make the same as men. You know that, right? That's why we have an Equal Pay Act, because the Constitution wasn't strong enough. The reason why we have a Civil Rights Act is because the Constitution doesn't allow for you to have to respect someone on the basis of their identity. That's why we have these laws, because the Constitution is not a strong enough definition to hold the ambitions of a diverse nation. And so if we have to keep amending it, it means that we didn't build it right. And if we didn't build it right, did we know we didn't? If you adopted the definition, the day you did, you knew it wouldn't hold the love that people need. Why did you adopt it? Why did you let it pass? Why did you let Todd keep talking? Because you know Todd's the one that got that bullshit definition out there. Like, we were all scared about upsetting Todd. We didn't want to ruffle Todd's not having feathers. It's time for it to no longer be about Todd. I speak with the urgency of my identity. My father tried to build a company like Justice Informed. We buried him under it. This world is going to get this work. They're going to get this work. Where I come from, we have a saying, go get your cousins. Some of y'all might know what that means. Go get your cousins. When you're in the hood, that means you need some backup. When you're talking about the not hood, you're saying, go ahead, get your people. He wrong, he off. Todd is talking. Go get Todd. Why do we need to go get, why do people who are related to Todd need to go get Todd? Because your work starts where your privilege starts. Stop going across town to having a painful epiphany at someone else's expense, because their pain has to be the classroom that creates an epiphany in your heart that leads you to empathy, to break traditions that never served anyone. This is what we got right now. It's time, y'all. I just want you to know, I wanted you all to see that there's this level of energy in this space right now, because we don't always see the energy. We don't always see the tenacity. We don't see the focus. We don't hear the urgency in the words. I wanted y'all to see what it's like. I'm from Chicago. This is how we sound. Y'all see what you see on the news. You hear what you hear on the web, all that kind of stuff. This is what we sound like. This is what it sounds like when the west side of Chicago, North Lawndale, the hood shows up and has the reins. This is what it sounds like. Don't be Todd. Demand a deeper definition that holds the ambitions of the love we need. Tell your people your work starts where your privilege starts. Tell them that. Identify your privilege and start working there. Go back home, get your cousins. You talk to Todd, John, because there's more of you than there are women in the C-suite. I love the time we live in, y'all. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm so glad I'm born in this time. I'm glad y'all are here. I just want to make sure y'all feel accountable to this level of ambition. I hope that you have this level of ambition. There's so much work to do. You excited about the work? Yes. You fired up about the work? Yes. Are they going to get this work? Yes. Turn up. Good to see y'all.